The Secrets of Middle-earth is brought to you by the StarQuest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give.
You're listening to The Secrets of Middle-earth, where we discuss the hidden themes and deeper layers found in the works of J.R.R. Tolkien, whether in his writings or whether in any of the media derived from them. I'm Thomas Salerno, and joining me today are Rob Leonardi. Hello, Rob.
Howdy.
And Jeff Haecker. Hello, Jeff.
Hey, Thomas.
And Patrick Mason. Hello there, Pat.
Howdy, Thomas.
And be sure to follow The Secrets of Middle-earth in Apple Podcasts, YouTube Music, Spotify, or any podcast directory or app. You can find us on social media on Facebook at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia, on X where we are at SQPN, or on Instagram where we are at StarQuest Network. And of course, don't forget that you can get your official Secrets of Middle-earth gear and merch, including our awesome t-shirt at sqpn.com/merch. It's a great way for you guys to support the show and to display your love for J.R.R. Tolkien and his wonderful world of Middle-earth. Now, Jeff, I understand we have some news this week.
Yes, kind of similar to what we've talked about before, but I guess recently Elijah Wood has been coming out and saying that in The Hunt for Gollum, he's read the script, I guess, and that there's cameos galore. So I'm just
No. See, now I'm convinced that they're doing that thing where it's all of them in Minas Tirith and that's the frame narrative.
Yeah.
And most of the movie is a flashback. Yeah.
It better be.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you could have at least the 4 hobbits in there because they were all around at this point.
Yeah.
And we're kind of, friendly with each other to some extent. But yeah, if we see, Gimli and Legolas showing up well, Legolas might show up to help hunt for Gollum, but if Gimli shows up too to hunt for Gollum, then it might be getting a little out there. But
I can see Legolas. And Aragorn. I cannot see the reason for anyone else. Okay, of course Gandalf. I can't see the reason for anyone else being in there.
Oh, they'll find a way.
Yeah.
And the other thing I saw was that the 4 Hobbit actors, so Elijah Wood, Sean Astin, Dominic Monaghan, and Billy Boyd are doing they're doing a 25th anniversary tour in 2026 to various conventions, and I believe it's titled An Evening with the Hobbits in celebration of 25 years, and because the Fellowship of the Rings film will turn 25 next year. So, and
I feel old now. Thanks.
Yeah. And I assume it will also be, kind of partially building up the buzz and press tour for Hunt for Gollum if they're, so we will see. Cause I think that movie is, December 2027, if I'm not mistaken. So we're almost a year, or almost 2 years out from it. So, but yeah, that's all the news that I saw. Nothing yet as far as Rings of Power when the next season will premiere. I think they're filming it now, or so presumably maybe about this time next year we might get it, which would kind of be on track with getting a season every other year. So.
Yeah, and I'm sure in both of those topics, Hunt for Gollum and Rings of Power, they'll keep drip feeding us information, which should allow us to have continuing news segments. So come on, guys, more info.
I mean, maybe they'll have Tariel show up and explain why she's not with Killy anymore.
Well, we know why, because Killy died. So maybe she'll find a new dwarf to love.
Oh, terrible. Anyway,
hey, we got the reference out of the way early.
Yeah, that's right. We better, because there's a lot to talk about. We are talking about the Akallabeth, the downfall of Númenor. We have finally reached this point in J.R.R. Tolkien's The Silmarillion. Jeff, you reminded me we've been at this, covering the Silmarillion for almost 2 years now, which is amazing. And we've, finally reached kind of the penultimate section of it. And of course, the downfall of Númenor is really kind of Tolkien's take on the Atlantis myth, which is fascinating because there are several kind of neat angles to discuss here. Rob, you reminded me before we started recording that there's actually a biblical connection, very tenuous, but it's there, in that Tolkien translated for the Jerusalem Bible the book of Jonah. And there's actually a very interesting reference. It doesn't mention Atlantis, of course, but this idea that crops up in the book of Jonah about there being this sort of underground or undersea civilization, I guess, gets picked up in actually there's a comic book by my pals at Voyage Comics, Jonah's Voyage to Atlantis, which kind of, expands on this and makes a fun adventure out of it. But I'll actually read the section. It's in Jonah chapter 2. This is when Jonah is cast off the boat and he's swallowed by the whale, and he sings a lament to God. So this is starting at chapter 2, verse 6. The waters surrounded me, right to my throat. The abyss was all around me. The seaweed was wrapped around my head. At the roots of the mountains, I went down into the countries underneath the earth, to the peoples of the past. But you lifted my life from the pit, Yahweh my God. That's very interesting. Countries underneath the earth, peoples of the past. And that phrase, roots of the mountains, that's very Tolkienian. I'm sure he used that phrasing in The Lord of the Rings somewhere. Yeah, because this is a Gollum went down to the roots of the mountains.
Yeah. And Gandalf kind of does too when he says when he fights the Balrog.
Yes. Yeah.
Yep. And that little section was actually a piece that Tolkien essentially alone translated himself, because every other Bible just translates verse 6 as, to the roots of the mountains I went down, to the land whose bars closed upon me forever. Yet you brought up my life from the pit, O Lord my God. And doesn't really talk about a civilization or peoples at all.
Right.
And so it's really cool that comic, Voyage to Atlantis, kind of expounds on that, where the concept of Jonah dying in the whale and going in kind of a purgatorial moment, if you will, before there was purgatory, going into Sheol and meeting, Adam and Eve, and meeting the ancients of old, and getting kind of wisdom from them to go and continue on the journey.
Yeah, it's a really cool story. And it also it ties into one of their other fantasy comics, Finian and the Seven Mountains, which has a lot of Tolkien references in it. So if you guys are fans of Tolkien, I really recommend
as well as Star Wars, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, they reference Star Wars a lot too in several visual moments. But yeah, and I'm not just saying that because I helped story edit some of the issues. I really think they're good.
We all know the truth of Atlantis we all know the truth of Atlantis is it was a bunch of ancients who traveled by Stargate throughout the galaxy and built the ship Atlantis, the city ship.
Yeah.
So for more on that, listen to The Secrets of Stargate.
Númenorians in space. But no, yeah, before we
which is completely different than when Milo found it for Disney. So
that's right. Yeah. So, and as you can see, like this story, Atlantis, like has ever since it was first like expounded by Plato in one of his dialogues, has stuck in the human imagination for centuries. And it's interesting because Tolkien himself, I don't know in which letter he mentions this, but he talks about having this recurring dream of Atlantis being swallowed by the ocean. And he actually puts his dream in the words of Faramir in The Lord of the Rings, because it's in the Return of the King in the chapter of the Steward and the King. Because, of course, Faramir, he was one of the characters he most identified with. And so if I suspect this passage is going to be very accurate to the dream that Tolkien himself would have this recurring dream. I'll read it out here. It's very interesting. So it's Faramir and Éowyn on the walls of Minas Tirith, and they're watching miles and miles in the distance the downfall of Mordor. And there's like a cloud billowing up into the heavens. It says, "Then presently it seemed to them that above the ridges of the distant mountains another vast mountain of darkness rose, towering up like a wave that should engulf the world, and about it lightnings flickered, and then a tremor ran through the earth, and they felt the walls of the city quiver. A sound like a sigh went up from all the lands about them, and their hearts beat suddenly again. It reminds me of Númenor," said Faramir, and wondered to hear himself speak. "Of Númenor?" said Éowyn. "Yes," said Faramir, "of the land of Westerness that foundered, and of the great dark wave climbing up over the green lands and above the hills, and coming on, darkness unescapable. I often dream of it." Okay, so Tolkien gets cool recurring dreams. I don't. I just get that recurring dream that I'm in college again and I have failed to study for my final exam. But
nice. The best of dreams, which we've all had.
Yeah. But yeah, I just thought that's fascinating that, this is something that Tolkien had in mind for a while. And if you read parts of the history of Middle-earth, you'll see that originally the Númenor stuff was not connected to the Legendarium. It was separate. It was only really once he started writing Lord of the Rings that these two great mythologies that he was working on, this kind of alternate Atlantis and then the history of the elves in Middle-earth, sort of merge and become one story, which I find that's just fascinating. So we can start talking about the Akallabeth proper. And the first thing I want to mention is that in the beginning of the Akallabeth, I want to get your guys' thoughts on this. It talks kind of about the fall of men in like the fall, kind of giving a mythological version of the Genesis account almost. It's really fascinating. It doesn't give a whole lot of detail, but there's a lot of room for speculation. And this is in the beginning of the Akallabeth. It says, "It is said by the Eldar that men came into the world in the time of the shadow of Morgoth, and they fell swiftly under his dominion. For he sent his emissaries among them, and they listened to his evil and cunning words, and they worshipped the darkness, yet they feared it. But there were some that turned from evil and left the lands of their kindred and wandered ever westward, for they had heard a rumor that in the west there was a light which the shadow could not dim. The servants of Morgoth pursued them with hatred, and their ways were long and hard, yet they came at last to the lands which look upon the sea, and they entered Beleriand in the days of the War of the Jewels. The Edain, these were named in the Sindarin tongue, and they became the friends and allies of the Eldar and did deeds of great valor in the wars against Morgoth." So yeah, what do you guys think of these hints of Morgoth's sending these dark emissaries and I guess leading to the fall of man as we know it?
Yeah, so it's it's very interesting because from the Quinta we learned that the Edain were first taught by Finrod. He found these men in the forest and taught them song and in the language and I don't think he taught them language as a concept. I would assume they already were speaking their own tongue already, but he taught them the elf language and taught them, kind of started bringing them up in elf culture, and then they became kind of loyal to him and his descendants because Barahir of course was kind of became a foster son of Finrod in ways and was part of his honor guard and saved his life, and then that's kind of when he was given the ring, which was passed from Barahir all the way down to Aragorn. So it's interesting that they found that this one people was kind of saved from that corruption of Morgoth. But I can imagine that if you were a man and, you know, just a human, and you were encountering all this like weird stuff going on, you know, these powerful creatures that are, you know, you might be getting attacked from all sides, and, you know, be given the choice of, oh, if you serve our dark lord, or, you know, if you come follow us, then you won't have that, and you'll be protected, or you'll be, you know, at least you won't be attacked or anything like that. So it's interesting that you had the loyalists, or, you know, the loyal men who become the Edain, and it's almost like with the Akallabeth, it's a separate history, because it's not part of the Quinta. It's kind of the post, you know, the postscript of the Quinta of, oh yeah, by the way, here's what happened to these men, and what leads into Lord of the Rings. So it is kind of interesting that there's like a kind of almost not a contradictory, but almost kind of like, you know, two differing accounts, that there could be some truth of each to it. So at least that's kind of how I was taking it, is that there's like, you know, a little bit of like, you know, like with any history, it's there's things that get muddled along the way.
Yeah, I think what's interesting to me is you have this kind of parallel path within Genesis and within this account, where you have the men falling under the sway of darkness, right? And, you know, what we see, you know, then it's just repeated over and over in the Bible and in human history in general. But what you see in Genesis is this move from this place where you have Adam, who literally walked in the garden with God, right? And Cain and Abel, who speak to God, right? They're on speaking terms. There's a whole conversation Cain has with God. And, you know, it's a conversation. It's not just a one-way prayer kind of a deal. And you get down to Noah, and the whole earth is just filled with nothing but, you know, sin and death, right? Like, they've just fallen so far away because they don't have the light, that relationship with God anymore. And I find the story of the Edain from that perspective to be a very kind of Noahian story. You know, these sort of people were kept afloat by the light and followed into the West, and then, you know, kind of came out and started this whole new race of men, effectively. And it sort of is you know, it's a little bit of a stretch, but it kind of a metaphorically, they're sort of saved from the rest of the race of men who kind of fall under the sway of Morgoth. And we see kind of that play out almost 3 times in the Akallabeth. We see this little proto thing, and then we see it again where they talk about the men who followed Morgoth, who go back to the east and sort of re-enslave all the people who were there. And then we see it a third time with Sauron. So,
what about you, Rob? Do you have any thoughts on this?
I mean, I think it's really kind of a cool allegory. I don't know if I'm really sold on the concept that, you know, the Shadow of Morgoth already was present when men showed up. If we're trying to look into parallels with the Bible and Genesis, yeah, you have the serpent who's already there in the garden. Somewhat, you know, God has already created the serpent, but not necessarily the serpent's not exercising his full force yet, right? But obviously in the Shadow of Morgoth, he's already done a lot of crap.
Yeah.
But I do think it's really interesting because you get the third paragraph. It says, in the great battle, when at last Morgoth was overthrown and the Thangordrium was broken, the Edain alone of the kindreds of men fought for the Valar, which shows that there is a lot there's more kindreds of men, and that parallels when we talk about how the sons and daughters of Adam and Eve just suddenly find more humans around.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, where did you come from? And just, it's kind of, it works in that sense. I'm not completely sold on it though.
Yeah, this is mythology. Tolkien's creating a mythology here, and he didn't want it to correspond 1-to-1 with the biblical narrative either. I think he would have thought that was almost like somehow sacrilegious in a way. Yeah. But yeah, those Edain, because they fight for the Valar, they are gifted with this new homeland in the midst of the sea. So they're no longer really of Middle Earth. They're kind of being taken, out of Middle Earth, but they're not being brought to the Undying Lands because they're not undying. They have what he's called in the Legendarium the gift of mortality, the gift of men, which will come into play later. But of course, since this is Tolkien, the land that they've been given can't just have one name. It has to have several names. So it is
all the names.
So we know it best as Númenor, of course, which means westerness or the most west, the uttermost west. But it's also called, interestingly enough, Andor, which I guess in Elvish does not mean Cassian Andor, who works for the rebellion, but it means, and I believe also in Wheel of Time, isn't the country that Rand is from, isn't it called Andor?
Yeah, or yes, his like home village is kind of like part of Andor, but hasn't really been ruled by Andor for a long time. But like on paper, it is. But yes,
on paper, okay. But yes, Andor in Tolkien's Legendarium means the land of gift, and then it's also called Elena. It is a gift, yeah. That's ironic, considering that the Lord of Gifts will be soon visiting there. And then it's also called Elena, or Starwards, because when they leave on the ships to go to this new land, they follow the star of Earendil, which kind of leads it to it. It's like the Magi, I guess. They're following the star.
Well, and at this point, the artist is still flat. So all of you flat artists out there,
flat artists.
It's what? It's still flat.
Still
at this
your
point.
time.
Yep. Yeah. The Dunedain are given longer life, but they're still mortal. And they're resistant to sickness. I mean, like Elros, the brother of Elrond, who's their first king, he lives to be like 500 years old. And that reminds me, of course, like another biblical reference, the fantastic ages of a lot of the Genesis patriarchs, I mean, for some of them, 500 years old is like, that's nothing, but it's like, but
yeah. Methuselah and some of the others.
Yeah.
900 some odd years old.
And it gives a brief description of Númenor itself. There's actually more about that in the Unfinished Tales, but one thing that they do mention prominently is the Menel Tarma, the holy mountain, where the king and his retainers will go to 3 times a year to pray to Eru Ilúvatar, and it also said offer first fruits, which was a very interesting thing there, because that is something that the people of Israel would also do, offer first fruits to God. But the mountain is open to the sky. They built no temple up there, which I think was not yet. Yeah, but there's no temple to Ilúvatar, and I think that's Tolkien wanting again to preserve the idea that like the first temple to the true God was built by David or Solomon, I should say, Solomon's temple. David wanted to build it, but wasn't given the opportunity. But I like this idea.
Even on the Holy Mountain part, it's almost the Valar created this mountain or created this island, and created all of Arda, and so it's the greatest temple is the one that was created by the Valar to hallow their creator Eru Ilúvatar. So I think there's an idea of that as well, that it's something that the Valar created is to honor Ilúvatar, and so no one else should build on this specific place in order to kind of preserve that.
Right, yeah. And they say from the top of this mountain you can just see Elvenholm, like in the distance, if you have the right sight. And again, because the earth is because the earth is flat, You can
just
see.
like when Moses goes up and is able to have the vision of all the world
and of the promised land. Yeah. It's like, and it reminds me too, like the holy mountains are everywhere in the Bible, from Mount Sinai to Mount Ararat, where the ark comes to rest, to Mount Tabor, where Jesus is transfigured, even to Golgotha itself. It's a hill. So this idea of holy mountains is like everywhere in the Bible. So of course Tolkien is going to incorporate a holy mountain for his own kind of chosen people, the Dunedain, the men of the West.
Well, same thing with Israel itself. You have everyone talks about going up to Israel because Israel was built on a mountain.
Mount Zion, yes, true pole of the earth, as it says in the Psalms. What about you, Pat? What do you think?
Well, so it's interesting because we have a direct reference to sacrifice. They offer first fruits, right? Which means they went up and offered sacrifice. I don't think we have a reference prior to this in the Silmarillion to people offering a physical sacrifice to Eru Ilúvatar. I think they talk about festivals and they talk about times where they, gather together to worship or praise, but they don't, the ultimate form or the true form of worship is sacrifice. And so it's interesting that we have this on display with the Númenóreans, but we don't have a lineage for it. Like, I don't know where it comes from, right? Is this something the Edain practiced back when they were with the elves, back when they were in Beleriand, or is this something that comes about as a result of the destruction? And, what we see in Rings of Power with sort of the temple spaces that have the little statues to the Valar, and then what if we have this people who recognize Eru Ilúvatar as like the one god, then what are the lesser gods to them, and then what's the proper relationship between those people and the Valar? It's always been something kind of a questioning in my mind about how that religiosity is supposed to interplay correctly.
I wonder if it's more so just the human innate desire to offer up things to God. That's where it comes from. Because if you take a look at the elves and all of the other races going through Middle Earth, they hearken to something else other than man. And if you take a look at, you have saints, you have angels, they don't make sacrifices. They're there praising God. They're there interceding for us and giving God glory and praising and asking God for things on our behalf. They're not themselves making sacrifices. They don't need to make sacrifices anymore. And I think that's kind of that idea that's why you don't see that previously with the elves or in other stories. But when you get to men, men don't have that same connection. They never got to be in the Undying Lands. They never got to be that close to God. So what are we going to do? We're going to offer what we have. We don't know how to pray properly because we never got that chance.
Interesting. Yeah. And I guess that speaks to later their desire, their kind of impious desire for the Undying Lands, to possess it, will continue to grow and grow and grow throughout the story. As Tolkien says, I think it's in On Fairy Stories, he says, the true fairy story, has temptation and the fall, And so in this case, they're being tempted, which we'll get into later, of, that having this longevity ends up not being enough for them. And they end up becoming envious of the other children of Ilúvatar, who innately have this, to them, seemingly like undying existence.
I don't remember which of the kings it talked about, but there were in this section, but one of them, it said like they would hold on to life until they, almost became like unhoused in a way, like they still had their bodies, but they basically, like, it almost seems like they can relinquish and pass away when they want to. when they get to a certain old age, like they can, realize it's their time and go, and pass on. But they hold on until the point where it seems like they become, mentally, they lose their mental faculties and become really angry and, senile, because they waited too long, because they were so attached to their life that they have here, and not really understanding the gift that they have, which is the gift of Iluvatar, to be what happens to men that doesn't happen to the elves.
That was I'm going to butcher this name, Anatomir.
Okay.
It says, and Anatomir lived to a great age, clinging to his life beyond the end of all joy. He was the first of the Númenóreans to do this, refusing to depart until he was witless and unmanned, and denying to his son the kingship at the height of his days.
Yeah, so that's, it's a twofold problem, right? Because you have the sort of letting yourself become, unmanned, as it says, or but also holding on to the kingship while all of that is happening. And it sets this new precedent whereby the king, effectively the king would retire once his son got to be of the proper age and could take over and rule. Now it's I'm going to rule till my very last breath, right? It reminds of, a lot of the monarchies in later, closing in on World War I in Europe, of how the monarchies were working back then.
Or the Skeksis Emperor in that first scene of the Dark Crystal, where he's like clinging to his last death rattle, clinging onto the scepter,
And we're not there yet, but that's, as we see in the Rings of Power, that's kind of setting up some of the problems with what's going on in Númenor. Is you haven't had a king, a strong king in a while, and even though Tar Palantir was kind of more on the faithful side of things than maybe his father and other kings, but you have that idea of like, if he had passed the and I know Rings of Power it's different than the Akallabeth, because it doesn't seem like it doesn't really seem like women can take power as as a full ruling queen. You can be a regent, but you are not, in
the Rings of Power. Yeah. Whereas in the Akallabeth, there were ruling queens.
Oh, there are. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or at least it says it in the Lord of the Rings appendices.
Okay.
It mentions 3.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So but it's not a common occurrence, at least if there were only 3.
No,
so
it's not common. Yeah.
I say once you turn 11-1, you should just retire.
Yeah. Throw a big party, insult all your guests.
And good speech, disappear.
Well, then the Númenóreans that live 500 years, what do you do for the rest
of your life?
Sail the earth. I mean, come on.
Yeah, that's right. So like the Númenóreans are like the Atlanteans of myth, are the greatest mariners and sailors of the earth. Now they're forbidden to travel west out of sight of Númenor. So they can't travel to the Undying Lands. They can't travel to Tol Eressëa, the Lonely Isle, or Avalone, as Tolkien calls it. Just putting that pin there that he's like, yes, this is Avalon. So he's tying it into the Arthurian legendarium there. And also reminding me of the Voyage of St. Brendan. If you guys have ever read it, or the Navigatio, as it's sometimes called, that legendary voyage of St. Brendan to Avalon, or as he calls it, the island of paradise, where it's very much like Valinor, where things grow but they don't wither, and you don't have to grow, you don't have to work to grow food; it just grows out of the ground. But yeah, so again, this idea of sort of this undying island of peace and plenty is throughout, the human. It must be just this archetype that keeps coming up, the promised land, right?
Well, yeah. So I mean, because it's the uncursed earth, right? So we live on the cursed earth, right? And I always try and remind people, read that extra bit in Genesis where God lays out the consequences. He's not subtle. Like it's
no,
you live on a cursed earth now. It's going to fight you even to give you what you want, and you're going to have strife between yourselves because of it, and because of the trust you broke with me. So yeah, it's and I think that's part of every good man-made mythology is this idea that there is something somewhere that is way better, where it doesn't take so much work to just live.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it also talks about when they're I don't know if you have this on here later, but when the Númenorians go sailing around, they kind of establish various various strongholds in Middle Earth, and it even talks about how they sail far south and maybe far north, and I'm like, I want to see what those what are those places like, because if it's not Middle Earth, if it's not the continent of Middle Earth, like if they're somewhere far south, is there another continent or something that they're going to, and like what's there, and that could be something cool we see in some kind of content down the road. So
South Pangea,
yeah. South Pangea, yeah, the antipodes, as it's called on old maps, yeah.
Well, and because in the Akallabeth, it refers to Pelargir as being in the north, right? And you look at a map of Middle Earth, it's not in the north, like what we would consider the north, right? Gondor is the southern kingdom, but it's really, if you look at it on a big map, it is, and it talks about a lot, especially after things go kind of wrong with the Númenorians, that they really established lots of settlements and places in the south. And you're like, well, what about those?
Yeah. I guess the only one we really know about is Umbar, because that's like the most northerly part of the south area. It's interesting that the Númenorians they kind of pay forward what they get from the elves, but in a more like aggressive colonialist way, because the elves come from Tol Eressëa. They voyage to Númenor sometimes, and they give them many like gifts of like different animals and trees that are only known in the Undying Lands. I think they mentioned they bring Malorn trees to Númenor, which is insane. But they bring another tree as well. They bring the white tree, Nimloth, which is like, if you trace its lineage of seedling to seedling, it eventually goes back to Telperion, the silver tree. That is now the moon, I guess. But yeah, so you have this tree symbolism again, the kind of tree of life, almost from Genesis. Yeah. What do you guys think of that? This idea that, because again, it's throughout Tolkien that like tree symbolism is very important.
I mean, he directly pulls a lot of stuff from Norse mythology, and you have I'm going to have to look up how to pronounce it because I'm going to butcher it.
Yggdrasil?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yggdrasil.
Yeah, I'm not
Yggdrasil or Yggdrasil.
Yeah.
The world tree.
Yeah. With Nidhogg eating it from the bottom, and Odin,
pinned to the tree.
The tree where the crow's eating his eye out.
Yeah, and I think he's definitely pulling from that a little bit with the white trees, and kind of getting all of the different seedlings throughout from the white tree throughout, got to take it and go from planted in Gondor, planted in on the hill beyond Gondor somewhere in the books.
The on Mount Mindolluin. Yeah. That's the idea. Like, this tree in Númenor will eventually become the white tree of Gondor, like its descendants.
Yeah.
So,
and I can't wait for the Mission Impossible scene in Rings of Power when Isildur steals the fruit of the tree of the.
Yes.
And we'll get to that. I think in our next part of the Akallabeth. Yeah.
That'll be good. Yeah, it's and another piece of kind of, I don't know, throwback's not the right word, but sort of Norse mythologizing is sort of these colonies. The original setup before they're colonies, they're just sort of places where the Númenorians go, and they provide gifts and learning and stuff, and then the Middle Earth folks consider them gods, right? Well,
right.
I'm trying to remember the name for the human realm in Norse mythology, but that's very
Midgard.
much
Midgard, yeah, Middle Earth.
Right, is Midgard,
yes.
And you have these Assyri or Númenorians or whatever you want to call them coming in and giving them these gifts, and so they're very much acting like the gods are in that sort of. And then what do the Midgardians or the Middle Earthers think of them? Oh, well, they're gods, right? They're these god kings that came across the sea.
Yeah, anthropologists refer to it sometimes as the corn gods myth, where the corn gods, they come across the ocean, they teach humanity agriculture, they teach them building, and then they leave, and they promise to return one day. And you see this in several European cultures. It's very interesting. But it's interesting that at the time, at around the same time the Númenorians start developing permanent bases in Middle Earth, is when that sort of shadow of doubt of the goodness of the Valar starts to settle over Númenor, right? And they're because they're bringing a lot of tribute from Middle Earth, and they're cutting down forests to help build their ships. And so they're amassing more material wealth. And as they amass more material wealth, they start to realize the shortness of their lives. They're like, we're not going to have enough time to enjoy all of our stuff. So they murmur against the ban of the Valar and are jealous of the Eldar, of the elves, of their seemingly immortal lives.
Yeah, and it's also interesting that at the same time that this is all happening, the next part of the Silmarillion is the Rings of Power in the Third Age, and it's kind of concurrently with what's going on here is Sauron kind of starting to take over what Morgoth left behind, and start to take power and learn to forge rings and go visit Celebrimbor. Like all of that is kind of starting to happen along with what's happening here. And the timeline is very fuzzy, which is why Rings of Power, to its credit, can get away with some timeline fuzziness, because there's not an established, like in the year, 2955 of the Second Age is when these two things happen. But it's very fuzzy, so they can kind of play with that some. So, but yeah, I just wanted to point it because I had forgotten that the Rings of Power in the Third Age, like the section, is kind of concurrent with this. Like I couldn't remember the sequence of events, but it's kind of like all kind of happening at once.
Yeah,
it's a postscript.
Well, it's this is what's going on. It's very much like what we get with this is what's going on with Frodo, Sam, and Gollum, and this is what's going on with the rest of the Shattered Company. And in this instance, we have this is what's going on in the West, and then the Rings of Power in the Third Age is kind of what's going on in the East.
Right. What Serenitar is doing, what Sauron in the East is doing.
He better not be Sauron.
Yeah.
What the Harfoots are doing, and
well, it's sad that we don't get what's happening in the East, because we don't find out the exploits of the Blue Wizards and what's going on in Rune and all that stuff. So, but I think it's always interesting to me to see the motivations, right? And the Númenorian motivation is it goes back to fear, right?
Yeah.
And it's this fear of the unknown, the fear of death, right? We don't know. You're making us trust, and I love the conversation that the messenger that gets sent from Manwë to them that has a conversation with the Númenorians and the back and forth. And that I often wonder how Tolkien got so good at portraying the back and forth that occurs in any given disgruntled people and someone trying to talk reason to them.
Yeah, I've noticed that too. Yeah.
He's very good at capturing the essence of how those conversations usually go, which is, we want Thing. Thing's going to be bad for you. It's not going to go well. Trust me. Too bad. We still want Thing.
Right. Yeah.
Like the kid who wants to try the spicy food, and you're like, you're not gonna like it, and they still want to try it anyway, and
they still want to try it anyway. Yeah.
There's you get this like the fear of death that really comes down to a fear of the unknown, which I think really goes back to a fear of the dark, because you have the men being born in the sun, and you have Morgoth making use of the shadows to terrify the men. And fear of the dark is just fear of the unknown, right? I'm not afraid of the darkness itself. I could care less that it's, that it's dark. I care about the Legos that are scattered across the floor. Destroy my feet, So I think in the same way you have on display in the Silmarillion, the fear of loss that the Noldor have for their things, you have the fear of loss that the men have for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I'll read out part of that because, as you say, Pat, it's really interesting that there's this debate, as you say, between the emissary of Manwë and one of the Númenóreans. Doesn't really say who, but Manwë's emissary says, "The Eldar, you say, are unpunished, and even those who rebelled do not die. Yet that is to them neither reward nor punishment, but the fulfillment of their being. They cannot escape and are bound to this world, never to leave it so long as it lasts. For its life is theirs. And you are punished for the rebellion of men, you say, in which you had small part, and so it is that you die. But that was not at first appointed for a punishment. Thus you escape and leave the world, and are not bound to it, in hope or in weariness. Which of us, therefore, should envy the others?" And the Númenóreans answered, "Why should we not envy the Valar, or even the least of the deathless? For of us is required a blind trust, and a hope without assurance, knowing not what lies before us in a little while. And yet we also love the earth, and would not lose it." So like you say, Pat, there's that the desire not to lose what they have, and also that fear that they have to take on blind trust that there's something good awaiting them on the other side, and they don't know that. So they don't have the theological virtue of faith. Yeah.
Or true hope.
Or exactly,
they talk about the hope without assurance. Well, if you had the true hope, you would have that assurance.
Right, yeah. So you get these two factions emerging, which we see in Rings of Power. You have the King's Men, so the people loyal to the royal family who have now, the kings are starting to become envious of the Eldar and resentful towards the Valar. And so you have the people who are loyal to this kind of new think that the regime is promoting. And then you have the people who are still loyal to the old ways, the faithful, or the elf friends. And it's at this point that the worship of Eru and the offering of the first fruits on the Meneltarma begins to be neglected. And I'm like, in the Bible, whenever Israel neglected to offer first fruits and the sacrifices at the temple, it did not go well.
Yeah. Things go poorly.
Yeah. Considering that 3 of these king's men end up as the ring wraiths.
Yeah.
One of them named I think Kevin. It went very poorly.
One of them named Kevin.
I was looking at the other characters. I think if you remember Belzegar, he's a lord from the north, like one of the older guys that supported Pharazôn becoming king.
Oh yeah,
I think he's going to be one of them too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
if not Pharazôn himself.
Oh, I remember that guy from the Rings of Power, right? That kind of sleazy nobleman. Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I don't think Pharazôn is, because not to spoil, but doesn't he go down with the ship of Númenor.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I mean, but again, they could change it and say,
unless he has a ring of power and comes back
as a shade.
Yeah.
All coming together.
Yeah. Maybe he's the Witch King. Who knows? That would be insane if our Farazan's the Witch King.
Farazan and Son together forever.
Farazan and Son. What are they, a car dealership or something? Anyway,
oh my gosh, because like you have Kemen become like the mouth of Sauron, and
yeah. Let's not give them too many ideas. I don't think they listen to this podcast, but their little AI.
Someone's going to share this episode with them.
Their little AI bot will listen to it and give them.
We'll email it to Jeff Bezos, and he'll tell them what to do.
But as you were saying, Jeff, Sauron is running around at this same time period, and he's arising in Mordor, and he builds Barad-dûr, the Dark Tower, and he is striving to essentially become Morgoth 2.0 and proclaims himself as a god king over men. And the elves call out, Gil-galad calls for aid, instead of Gondor calls for aid. Gil-galad and the elves, are, and which we'll see, I think, in the next season of the Rings of Power, that war in Eriador between the elves and Sauron after the forging of the rings. And they get Númenorian assistance in that war. And so that's, where Sauron gets his, in the beginning of his grudge against the Númenorians. But he fears them also. It says explicitly that he fears them. And I felt that was really interesting. That Sauron hates what he fears, right? Because it's something he can't control.
Can't control, right?
Yeah. Well, and he's had conflicts with their ancestors. Beren, he had a conflict with Beren and Luthien. It was kind of indirectly, but was he the?
Oh no, it was direct.
Okay.
Luthien screams his tower down.
Right.
Yeah, she sings his tower to dust, and he's defeated by a dog.
Yeah.
So
so he's had direct conflicts with their ancestors, and one of them led to, and then one of their descendants destroyed the biggest dragon ever with a flying ship. So there's so there's and Elrond's in Middle Earth at this point as well. So he's running around. So yeah, I mean he has reason, I think, to fear the descendants of of Beren and Luthien.
Yeah. I have a grudge against your great grandfather.
And that's what happens when you're dealing with an immortal spirit, right? He can have a grudge against your far ancestor, and you're like, "Oh, I didn't have anything to do with that." And it's like, but to him, it was yesterday. So
yeah. Him and Elrond, we remember it like it was yesterday.
Yeah,
I don't even know you people.
I don't even know who you are.
Yes,
I was there, Gandalf. Yeah. It finally gets to the point where one of the Númenorian kings tend to take throne names. They take regnal names, like the popes do, and like kings in ancient days used to do. And so one of the Númenorian kings eventually takes the throne name of Ar-Adunahor, which means now that's not in the Elven tongue, it's in their own Adunaic or Western kind of tongue, and it means the Lord of the West. So he is usurping the title of Manwë as the Lord of the West. I'm like, that's
a great idea.
Go ahead and do that.
You see,
how does that work out for you?
You see Mandos off in the halls, perking his ears up, like, "Oop, I smell doom coming."
I smell doom. Freshly baked doom.
Yeah, and it's very much on track with what we see in kingdoms on Earth, throughout human history, right? Eventually, when power coalesces enough into a single person, they declare themselves a god. It's almost a guarantee. Rome starts, with the kings, and then eventually you get a democracy, and then you have the emperors, and very swiftly the emperors declare themselves as gods. Not just God for a day during their tribute, but for the whole time that they're in charge. And you see, all history that we have shows this progression. And the only reason it didn't happen in Europe up to World War I was because we had Christianity. So instead of declaring themselves gods, they declared themselves the chosen of gods. They had one step down, right?
Right. Divine right of kings. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. Which is total BS. Have you read the Bible? God tends to choose random folks.
Right. And also, like, when Israel demands a king, God's like, this was not my plan for you to have a king, and you're not going to like having a king. And there's like, no, give us a king. Like you said, Pat, I want that thing. And so, like,
I want the thing, but it's going to not work out for you.
Yeah, because
it's going to steal your children.
There's always that tension, right? Because, in the monotheistic faiths, God is the supreme king over everything. And so there's that tension where it's like, if you have an earthly king, there's the possibility of the earthly king infringing on the prerogatives of the divine king, Yeah.
Which is why, we ended up with Henry VIII. Like, I'll just put myself as both the mediator of the temporal and the spiritual world, and therefore I don't need to worry about ever stepping on God's feet because I get to decide what God said.
Right. And he's like, being given the title Defender of the Faith was not good enough. I'm just going to declare myself head of the church. Yeah. And just it's funny you bring up Henry VIII because there's so much in the Númenorian story, with the kings persecuting the faithful, as what happens, the people who use the old tongue, the tongue of the elves, and persecuting the people who are still loyal to the Valar and to Eru Ilúvatar. That is like the persecution of Catholics under Henry VIII and under Queen Elizabeth and their successors. And I think Jeff, you and I were talking about this once about how, especially in the Rings of Power, Elendil is very much a Thomas More figure.
Yeah. And I mean, I've been rewatching season 2 of that, and I just got to the part where, the faithful are, they're shutting down the shrines to build an aqueduct. They're, and Elendil's getting arrested, and they're shoving the faithful out of the Sea Guard and to put in, to make sure there's no one in a place of power that can challenge them. So, which of course is going to go spectacularly for Farazan
for all concerned. Yeah. And and Tolkien, being a Catholic in majority Anglican England, he grew up at a time where it was still, socially disadvantageous to be a Catholic. And he's technically a convert because he was not baptized Catholic. He only comes into the Catholic Church as a young boy, but he wasn't baptized into the Catholic Church. And his mother, believed, like the social pressure that she was under contributed, he believed, to her early death. So he has that whole history of English persecution of the faith over the last 500 years in the back of his head while he's writing this.
Yeah, because wasn't his...
And that's effectively what C.S. Lewis chose, like why C.S. Lewis chose not to convert to Christianity too. The idea that he's going to be persecuted effectively by his own family.
Yeah, because wasn't it Tolkien's mom, like they wouldn't help her because she converted? And like that led to
the family cut off the family support. Yeah.
And that's why he grew up in a not an orphanage, but whatever you want to call it, a fostership situation with
with the priest.
With the priest, and
right?
or like he was their guardian, but he lived in a boarding house of a lady, and
and so you have, as part of this back and forth, there is a moment where Númenor can change course, and that's when the king in Zilladun takes the scepter but he chooses as his regnal name Tar Palantir. Now, we've seen him in the Rings of Power as the crazy old guy confined to bed. I just love that stuff when he'll sit bolt upright in bed and start making having a seer moment where he's making predictions about the future. Don't go to Middle Earth. And I'm like, that's great.
Yeah, and it's interesting that I guess they wanted to really put Pharazôn in that role, but yeah, it's interesting that Gilmacud is not mentioned in the Rings of Power as the one who would take, who would steal his brother's throne. So
yeah, they mentioned, I think in season 1, they mentioned that there was a civil war and that Pharazôn's father was involved, but I don't think they name him. They drop him as Gimilcad. But yeah.
Well, and unless his name is in the because they don't have rights to the Silmarillion. Their rights are to the Lord of the Rings, so they're going primarily out of the what do they call it?
Appendices?
Yeah, the appendices in the back. So unless his name is in there, they're not going to use it because his name is in the Silmarillion. So
that's true.
But there's this idea of Tar Palantir as kind of there's another archetype of the prophet king, which reminds me of David. David being a prophet king. The Psalms are attributed to him. He prophesied on several occasions. Didn't mean he was always a good king, but but in his best moments, he was a prophet king. So yeah, I like this idea.
And he didn't have a Palantir to warp his mind.
No, he let other things warp his mind sometimes.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I believe it is Tar Palantir. He prophesies that if the white tree of Númenor perishes, then the line of kings will come to its end. So yeah,
which is kind of a idea of hey, you guys are killing the white tree. Let's turn things around here. Yeah. And they go right off the cliff.
Yeah.
But at this point, the elves know they're not welcome in Númenor. So we're leaving off actually at a section that says, but no ship ever came from the west to Númenor, and Avalone was veiled in cloud. So they can't even see that hint of the Undying Lands anymore that they could see if they climbed the Men El Tarma, but they're not going up there anyway because they stopped giving first fruits. But yeah, what do you guys think about where we're leaving off here? And think things don't look good. Mandos is sharpening his knives.
Well, I mean, we don't have to cover the next section because Rings of Power is now the new canon and has established itself, so we don't have to cover anymore.
Yeah.
I feel like you're going after me on purpose in this point.
I would never do that.
Call Alex. Get her back on.
But I mean, in all seriousness, I mean, we are seeing, this is kind of where the Rings of Power starts the show, because the next section is really about the rise of Pharazôn and really the kind of the downfall of Númenor that we're seeing, and will probably be the season, main plot of season 4 of Rings of Power is the actual kind of downfall happening. And, if my predictions are right, it'll end with, season 4 is the downfall and, the faithful leaving Númenor and making it to Middle Earth and establishing the kingdoms there. So, but we have
seems really a reasonable assumption.
Yeah. So.
So yeah, spoilers ahead for the Rings of Power. But I mean, we've already seen the downfall in the Palantir in the Rings of Power. So,
but wait, they could possibly stop that from happening.
Right? Yeah, right. Yeah.
It'll be the alternate universe where Númenor survives.
Or they just take the DeLorean back in time to stop it from happening.
I was thinking just
it's
a time
your kids,
turner.
Marty.
It's your kids.
It's your kids, Elros. Your great grandkids.
Or they trick out they trick out Vingalot with however many gigawatts of power they need to
The flux capacitor.
1.21.
yeah.
They had a flying train in Back to the Future Part 3, so may as well have the flying ship.
Flying ship. Oh my gosh.
Use the force, Harry.
So yeah, we have decided to split off the Rings of Power in the Third Age into its own episode. So that will actually mark the podcast's 100th episode if you number them from the very, very beginning when Father Roderick was doing this. So it's cool that we'll kind of be doing our final farewell bow to our Silmarillion coverage as our 100th episode. That's really neat.
Did I see that our next read through might be the Tales from the Perilous Realm?
I want to do that. Yeah,
that'd be cool.
That would be really neat because there's some stuff, even though a lot of those stories are only tangentially related to Middle Earth, there's some fascinating connections in those to the Middle Earth stuff.
I just think after we finish,
their work really good.
After we finish reading the Silmarillion, we're gonna go back and listen to our podcast and then critique our podcast for 20 something episodes. Like, where did we get it right? Where did we get it wrong?
3 years ago, I thought that was the correct interpretation, but now,
now it really is Sauron.
Oh yeah.
I just meant our episodes on the Silmarillion, not even of the show.
No, I know. Yeah.
Just wait. Actually, I think it's going to be Gandalf and Sauron are going to be the blue wizards that disappear, and then the real Gandalf and Sauron come in.
Oh, you mean Saruman? Yeah.
That's what I meant. Sauron.
Yeah. So, like, the Gandalf and Saruman that we have now are fake. They become They're going
to be the blue wizards that just go off into the distance.
Okay. I think I can get behind this. All right.
Well, before things get too off the rails about Rings of Power, because we could go off about that like all night. Jeff, you have collected some feedback for us.
Yeah, just a little bit. So on our episode on Arendelle, we had Sean MCC said Doom. I'm assuming that's how he meant it for it to be typed.
Doom.
And then we had Paul Leone say the Vanyar's finest hour, maybe second finest after they told Feanor to take a hike with his revolt. Because the Vanyar, we called out that the Vanyar actually did something.
Yeah, they did something. Yeah, good.
And they were really good at it, turns out. Yeah. The Noldor were like, what? Why couldn't we do this?
Yeah. Imagine if they were doing something all along.
And then we had Tammy said, on your reading of the Song of Arendelle, she said, "Bravo, Thomas, elf friend. My favorite Tolkien song, and your performance was spot on. Not bad at all for Immortal."
Aw, thank you, Tammy.
And then she continues saying, "I finished the episode and have to also say amazing work to Pat the Bard on his latest composition. Wow." And then also
thank you.
A huge congrats to Rob and fam on your upcoming edition.
Thank you very much.
Feanor Leonardi. And then
don't do it.
And then she says,
actually, it's going to be he's going to be named after Thomas More, actually.
Okay.
Wow, very cool.
Good pick.
And then she finally said, "And a hug for Jeff, just because y'all are awesome. Thanks for another fabulous episode." And then on Halloween, we had Eldir say, "I'm a fairly stoic guy, although the contractual romance that shall not be spoken of jokes usually get me to grin. But the opening of this episode had me cackling."
Yes. Good job, Rob.
Awesome.
Nailed it.
Yes, it was wonderful.
And then Tammy said, "I was absolutely rolling at the intro. Y'all went above and beyond. I loved it." Yep.
I'm so glad we did that.
That was awesome.
Yeah. Shout out to Dom for letting us do all this crazy stuff.
Yes, thank you, Dom.
Yes, thank you, Dom,
for putting up with our insanity from week to week. Yeah.
I just imagine him listening to this before he publishes, being like, "What are you guys doing?"
But that's it for the first section of our discussion of the Akallabeth. But before we go, we'd like to take a moment to thank our patrons who make possible the Secrets of Middle-earth, including Joseph G., Adam B., Mark B., Nellie B., and Lynn Z. Their generous donations help us to continue to create this podcast and all of the shows at StarQuest, and you can join them at sqpn.com/give. Now we'd like to hear from you, our great listeners. What do you think about the first section of The Downfall of Númenor, the Akallabeth? You can let us know on our Facebook page or on Twitter. You can send an email to middleearth@sqpn.com, or you can leave us a comment on YouTube or on Spotify. And you can visit our great channel on the StarQuest Discord community at sqpn.com/Discord. So join us next time for part 2 of the Akallabeth. Until then, Jeff Haecker, thank you for joining me in sharing the secrets of Middle-earth.
Thanks, Thomas.
And Patrick Mason, thank you as well.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thanks for having me on.
And Rob Leonardi, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Thomas, for having me.
And once again, I'm Thomas Salerno. Thank you for listening to The Secrets of Middle-earth on StarQuest.
Here's another show on the StarQuest network you're sure to enjoy. The Secrets of Stargate. Find it wherever fine podcasts are found or at sqpn.com/Stargate.